When Sauron had seized the Rings of Power, 9 did he bestow upon mortal men. Of these, 3 were Black Númenórean lords. This terrifying triad had been great kings, terrific sorcerers, and mighty warriors in their day. Alas, they proved but frail vessels to bear the burden given to them. For the One Ring held dominion over all, and one by one they fell under its sway, becoming the Nazgûl. Amongst them, a sorcerer and a rumoured Black Númenórean lord rose swiftly in Sauron's esteem. He became the second in command, and was known thereafter as the Witch King. During the Third Age, Sauron entrusted to him a vast host and a fell purpose, to carve out a new realm and to unleash war in the north. Welcome to our latest video on the military history of Middle-earth, in which we will explore the haunting, unlife and terrible campaigns of the Witch King of Angmar. After his defeat by King Isildur and the loss of the One Ring, Sauron fled east to regain his power, with his Nazgûl servants also disappearing in the wake of his retreat. By TA 1000, Sauron had regained the ability to take physical shape, and had manipulated the Easterling tribes into invading Rhovanion. The distraction this caused allowed Sauron to establish the realm of Dol Guldur in TA 1080. Rumours emerged in the west of a necromancer taking up residence in the ruins of Amon Lanc, with most believing it was the work of a Nazgûl. In truth, Sauron was too weak to face the west on the open battlefield, so he chose to hide under this guise and wage proxy wars against his enemies. By TA 1300, Sauron had amassed a large enough army to dispatch Orcs to begin colonizing the Misty Mountains, paving the way for his next move. It was at this time that the Nazgûl reappeared, and Sauron ordered the strongest among them, the Witch King, to forge a new realm in the north, for the sole purpose of destroying the ailing kingdom of Arnor. Through the Misty Mountains network, the Witch King travelled far north, to the cold and mountainous region beyond Eriador. There he formed the Kingdom of Angmar, between the Etenmoors and the titular Mountains of Angmar. At the northwestern extremity of this mountain range, he built his capital, Khan Dûm, a fortress which may have been built over an abandoned Dwarven city. Khan Dûm was the northwestern extremity of the Misty Mountains network, linking to Dol Guldur and other strongholds, such as Mount Gram and Gundabad. Its location allowed the Witch King to gather hosts of orcs, trolls, evil men, and fell beasts. By the time of the Kingdom of Angmar's founding, Arnor had fractured into the 3 petty kingdoms of Rhuidear, Cardolan, and Arthedain. The line of Isildur had failed in Cardolan and Rhuidear, while Argaleb I took the throne of Arthedain in TA 1226 and claimed lordship over all 3 kingdoms. Cardolan accepted his claim, but Rhuidear refused to do so. As Rhuidear was the closest kingdom to Angmar, with no ties to its 2 sister kingdoms, and the smallest population of the Dunedain, the Witch King focused on it first. To that end, he secretly allied with the Lord of the Hillmen, residing in Etenmoor and the Angle. Then the Hillmen offered their assistance to Rhuidear, only to then turn on their hosts and seize power over the kingdom. The fall of Rhuidear alarmed King Argaleb I of Arthedain, who immediately began fortifying the Weather Hills. In response, the kingdoms of Angmar and the now hostile Rhuidear laid siege to this region, slaying Argaleb I in battle. However, this would not be the end of the Arthedain, for the fallen king's successor, Arvaleg I, led a counterattack, supported by Cardolan and the Elves of Lindon, to dislodge the Witch King's forces from the Weather Hills and Rivendell. Yet the Witch King attacked again in TA 1409, slaying Arvaleg I and razing Amon Sul, nearly capturing its Palantir. Meanwhile, the remaining Dunedain of Rhuidear were slain or fled, as the Witch King invaded the 2 remaining successor states of Arnor. Cardolan was ravaged, driving its Dunedain population to defend a line at Tain Gothad, with many taking refuge in the Old Forest. In Arthedain, Fornost was besieged, and it seemed victory was at hand, until King Arafor took the throne and repelled the invaders at Fornost and the North Downs. After this, the elven domains of Rivendell and Lothlorien added their support, and helped the men of Arthedain push the Witch King back. For centuries, the 2 sides continued to battle, resulting in Angmar slowly gaining ground and occupying most of Cardolan. During the reign of Argaleb II, a great plague spread northwest, destroying the north and south garrisons at Tharbad, before sweeping through Eriador, only to stop short of northern Arthedain. This disease killed most of the population of Cardolan, including all of the last Dunedain of Cardolan. Exploiting this, the Witch King unleashed a power taught to him by Sauron, that of necromancy. He set evil spirits from Angmar and Rhuidear to inhabit the dead bones and grave mounds of Tain Gothad, including the last prince of Cardolan. Henceforth, Tín Gurthad became known as the Barrow Downs. The imprisoned spirits became the Barrow Wights, shadowy pale figures with icy light gleaming from their eyes. By TA 1636, Cardolan was effectively abandoned. Later, in TA 1851, King Aravel of Arthedain attempted to retake Cardolan, but the Barrow Wights frightened off any to dare dwell near the Barrow Downs. In TA 1940, convinced the recent disaster and attacks were coordinated by a singular evil power, King Araphant and Onderher restored the ancient alliance between Gondor and Arnor. By TA 1973, the Witch King had amassed a great host to deliver a death blow to Arthedain, prompting the reigning King Arvedui to send word to Gondor for assistance. King Eärnil of Gondor mustered a great armament bound for Lindon, but it would arrive far too late. During the brutal winter in TA 1974, the Witch King's 40,000-strong host overran most of Arthedain, overwhelming a coalition defense force of Arthedain, Lindon, Rivendell, Lothlorien, and even 500 Hobbit archers of the Shire. The Witch King captured Fornost, dislodged the coalition from the North Downs, and pushed them over the Lune into Lindon as he occupied Arthedain. King Arvedui and his guard first fled to the abandoned mines of northern Eret Luin, but were driven by hunger and sought refuge amongst the Lossoth of Forochel. The snowmen gave them shelter and food, as Círdan dispatched a ship to rescue them. However, it arrived in the dead of winter in March, prompting the snowmen to plead with Arvedui not to risk the voyage until summer, but he did not heed their advice. Instead, the King of Arthedain gifted the snowmen the Ring of Barahir and set sail, but his ship's hull broke upon the ice. The king and 2 Palantiri sank, and thus the kingdom of Arthedain came to an end. The Witch King had little time to enjoy his victory, for Arnor arrived to Lindon with his massive fleet, bringing a vast army from Gondor supported by Northmen. Círdan rallies the warriors of Lindon, remnants of Arthedain's Dunedain, and even some Hobbit archers to march east over the Lune and challenge the Witch King at Fornost. Receiving word of their march, and overly confident, the Witch King sent his army outside the protection of Fornost's walls, believing he could drive the enemy back over the Lune. However, the host of the west passed over the southern hills of Evendim and engaged Angmar's army on the plains between Nenuil and Fornost. The armies of Angmar rushed to meet them, and seeing this, the Prince of Gondor sent his cavalry north into the hills of Evendim to ambush the overconfident foes. With this, the battle began, as the might of Angmar crashed into the Gondorian centre. This assault could have proved catastrophic if it was not for the battle-hardened lines of infantry who had repulsed the Wain Riders in the not-so-distant past. The fighting was brutal, with casualties beginning to mount on both sides. It is at this point the cavalry, sensing the pivotal moment in the battle, charged down from the hills, crashing into the rear of Angmar's line. The battle shifted immediately, with the surrounded warriors of Angmar falling in swathes. Realizing he was all but defeated, the Witch King attempted to retreat to the east. Yet he would earn no reprieve there, as the elven hero Glorfindel led a second host from Rivendell up from the south. So, caught between a rock and a hard place, the army of the Witch King was utterly destroyed. Arnor then challenged the Witch King to single combat as the army of Angmar fell apart around him. His stalwart heart, however, was not matched by that of his horse, as it panicked under the Witch King's gaze and fled. The Witch King taunted the young prince before fleeing the field himself. It is at this point that Glorfindel uttered the famous words to his young friend and ally that, "Not by the hand of mortal man would the Witch King be slain." While Angmar was utterly defeated, the Witch King escaped north, having accomplished his lord's orders to destroy Arnor. Despite Angmar being located at the northern extremity of Middle-earth, it had ample access to forges and a massive supply line. The Orcish colonization of the Misty Mountains provided a robust tunnel network for the movement of orcs and supplies between Dol Guldur, Carn Dûm, and Gundabad. Gundabad and possibly Carn Dûm were former dwarven halls, with forges that would have provided weapons and armor for Angmar. The preferred weapons of the orcs were curved scimitar-like swords, poisoned spears, and arrows, but they also used daggers, axes, hammers, spears, pickaxes, swords, tongs, bows of horn, and any other manner of tool. For armor, they tended to forge stout ring mails, intertwined with leather, iron helmets, and small shields. Orc forges most likely fashioned weapons and armor for men and trolls as well. the Witch King personally sported some of the fiercest weaponry Middle-earth had ever seen, such as Morgul blades, a longsword, a great black mace, and the dreadful Black Breath. Morgul blades could turn victims into wraiths, while Black Breath caused them to slip into a dark sleep, from which they never recovered. It is known that Haradrim archers wielded weapons laced with Black Breath against Faramir. The Witch King acted as the Kingdom of Angmar's commander-in-chief, and most likely had orcs, men, or even Black Númenóreans filling out the file ranks of Marshal, Lieutenant, Captain, and Chieftain. Furthermore, Angmar acquired semi-autonomous allies, such as the Hillmen, to augment its forces. Tolkien scholar Tom Loback estimated the great host that invaded Cardolan in TA 1409 to be roughly 50 to 75,000 strong, representing the zenith of Angmar's strength. The majority of Angmar's forces consisted of northern orcs, who primarily served as infantry and archers. Although smaller than men, with crooked bodies and bow legs, they were fierce in combat and took pleasure in inflicting pain. They were also skilled at taming and riding wolves and wargs, providing Angmar with a form of light cavalry. One of Angmar's greatest advantages was a large population of trolls. Since ancient times, trolls had settled north of the Misty Mountains, particularly near the Etenmoors, swelling in number since the establishment of Angmar. Even after the fall of Angmar, trolls made dens in the hills as far west as the North Downs, despite the efforts of the Rangers of the North. Given its geography and climate, it is possible that cave trolls, mountain trolls, stone trolls, and hill trolls populated Angmar. We know that Arador, the grandfather of Aragorn, was slain by hill trolls in the Coldfells. Hill trolls were taller and broader than men, and were known to wield round bucklers and heavy black hammers in Gorgoroth. With there being no mention of Olog-hai in Angmar, it seems Sauron did not dispatch them that far north. Lastly, the elusive term snow troll, used only once to describe the behaviour of King Helm Hammerhand during the siege of Suthburg, might imply the existence of a rarely seen subspecies of troll inhabiting Forodwaith, thus possibly joining Angmar's war. In general, trolls were heavy shock units, capable of breaking enemy formations. They were also able to move and utilise heavy siege weaponry, which would have been necessary to defeat fortresses like Fornost or Amon Sul. We know little about the men who populated Angmar, but we can make educated guesses about their culture, society, and fighting style. They might have been a mixture of the descendants of the ancient Forodwaith, Ulfang's tribe of the First Age, the Hillmen, and perhaps the Black Númenóreans. We know a significant number of evil men joined the Witch King's army, and many of them survived the fall of Angmar. For when the Eotheod received word of the Witch King's downfall, they began migrating north, driving away the remnants of the people of Angmar on the eastern side of the mountains. Angmar was due south of Forodwaith, a region which likely possessed a subarctic tundra climate, with farmable land and fish to feed its population along the River Lune. Additionally, the Misty Mountains network provided a robust trade and supply route for mannish needs. Given that the Witch King rode a black horse, one can deduce Angmar bred at least some horses, allowing men to act as shock cavalry and horseback archers in small numbers. Men would be a minority within Angmar's army, and most likely used as elite units who required enticement for battle. The Witch King most likely promised them the land and riches of conquered territories, as was evident with his allegiance to the Hillmen to seize lordship over Rhudaur. Thus, men proved useful on the battlefield and in diplomacy. The Witch King's army was said to contain fell creatures, presumably meaning wolves and wargs, and possibly white wolves of Forodwaith, predominantly used for orc light cavalry. Lastly, the Witch King used necromancy to produce Barrow-wights, which would not have been effective as offensive units, but were extremely effective to garrison Cardolan, providing an element of psychological warfare at little cost. When the Witch King began making war on the successor states of Arnor, he faced three petty kingdoms in quarrel with each other and adopted a divide-and-conquer strategy to triumph over them. His army held numerous fortified settlements, which the ancient Númenóreans had built, such as Annúminas, Fornost, and Amon Sul. Thus, he had to find means other than brute force to breach them. For Rhudaur, he chose diplomacy, using the Hillmen to take control of their crumbling kingdom. For Cardolan and Arthedain, he pursued a policy of attritional siege warfare. With ample supplies of trolls to move siege machines and supplies, Angmar was uniquely fit for the task. Angmar's forces also had quicker population growth compared to the men and Dunedain, giving them a distinct advantage. On the open field, with a force consisting mostly of orcs, the Witch King would have relied upon swarming tactics, such as human wave attacks. During times of sunlight, the Witch King also could depend on evil men to maintain his sieges and offensives. Lastly, the Witch King relied on his necromancy to garrison and prevent counter-offensives by the enemy, fortifying areas like the Barrow Downs with Barrow Wights. Despite its geographical extremity, climate, and extremely diverse population, the Witch King of Angmar had established one of the most formidable realms Middle-earth had ever seen. Angmar wielded tremendous military, political, and fear-inspiring power against the three petty kingdoms of Arnor. Through the strategy of divide and conquer, siege tactics, and psychological warfare, the Witch King proved himself a master of both conventional and asymmetric warfare. Despite succumbing to the coalition of Lindon, Rivendell, Lothlorien, Gondor, and the Anorian survivors, the Witch King achieved his Lord's master plan. His accomplishment was so grand, Sauron would place him in charge of Mordor's forces to crush the Kingdom of the South next. More videos on the military history and societies of Middle-earth are on the way, so make sure you are subscribed and have pressed the bell button to see it. Please consider liking, commenting and sharing, it helps immensely. Our videos would be impossible without our kind patrons and YouTube channel members, whose ranks you can join via the links in the description to know our schedule, get early access to our videos, access our Discord, and much more. This is the Wizards and Warriors channel, and we will catch you on the next one.